Hey, it's Jay. I wanted to extend a special thanks to those of you who have listened and left reviews on iTunes for this podcast. Please leave a review if you haven't done so already. We sincerely appreciate it. We're producing this show independently, and unfortunately, that is not free. We have to pay for digital hosting space, software, equipment, websites, and travel out of our own pockets. But we'd love to keep this show going as long as possible. Pledge your support by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/pledge. Thanks for your support and enjoy the show. Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, powered by Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, episode number 190. Dan Infalt. Buck beds, swamps, closing time bucks, and hunt where they don't. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Advanced Takedown Tree Stands and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
This is Jen O'Hara.
And this is Narissa Harmon with Girls with Guns Clothing and Universal Huntress TV.
Gear up for another amazing podcast with Jay and Dusty on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
This is Laura Zara from Naked and Afraid, and you're about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry.
Hey everyone, this is Nikki Boxford from Winchester Life. Get ready to press play on my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, welcome to the show. This is Jay, and I'm hanging out in the podcast studio with my good friend Dusty Phillips. What's happening, Dusty?
Just hanging out in the studio, Jay. Getting ready to fire off the next exciting podcast.
Yes, sir. Another amazing guest today. And I think if you're listening to this right now, you're going to like this a lot because chances are you're a hardcore hunter. You're a hardcore deer hunter. And Dan Infalt joining us today, and he is recognized as one of the best deer hunters in America, and he has some very cool tactics, and a lot of people have tried to do what he does. So I think a lot of people look up to him, and we decided to go out and get the man himself. So he's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. So stay tuned for that. Also, in addition to today's show, on Thursday, Dan is going to be joining us live on the Big Buck Registry Facebook page to answer questions that might come up during this show. So as you're listening, jot down some notes, send yourself a text, whatever you have to do, jot down a note, and then join us on Thursday at 6 o'clock Eastern on our Facebook page. Going live with Dan. I'll be there. Dusty, you'll be there. Dan Infalt and his buddy Mario will be joining us from their studios, and we're going to be answering any questions that come up along the way. So get ready, because you're going to have access to Dan Infalt live and ask any questions you want. It's pretty darn cool.
Oh, it's very cool. That live feed is a lot of fun.
Yeah. We had that inaugural visit with Laura Zira from last week. Now we're going to be doing a lot more of it. We are still doing the harness program, but we're out of harnesses. So if you have a harness to donate, please shoot me an email or Dusty an email about the harness, jay@bigbuckregistry.com or dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. I do want to let everybody know that I am going to be down at the Trinity Sportsman's Outdoor Show coming up here in New Hampshire on April 1st. Definitely come down and join me and take a look around. There's a lot of great vendors down there, a lot of great outdoors people. Trinity Sportsman's Outdoor Show in Concord.
Very cool, Jay. Should be a fun time. Come down and join Jay there at the sports show.
You going to be anywhere, Dusty?
Yeah, Jay, I'll be at the Ohio Deer and Turkey Expo in Columbus, Ohio, probably Saturday, March the 18th when I'll roll into town. The expo's going March 17th, 18th, and 19th. So if you're headed up to the Ohio Deer and Turkey Expo, shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. I'd like to meet everybody that goes.
Dusty, I had the pleasure of talking to a fella this week by the name of Jonathan Randolph. And Jonathan sent in the video of the 12-point doe. Now, I said 12-point doe. I mean, it was a doe. Great rack. Actually, just got the mount back. And when he sent in the video, we posted it on our Facebook page. It went viral. It went to reached well over 1 million people. I think it's still going now. So people loved it. And it literally is a video of the entire deer, and you can see the rack. You also know it's a doe. It's not a buck. You can tell. So we thought we'd reach out to Jonathan and get the exact story of what went down. So here's Jonathan.
Well, it was a new place. I just started hunting, and I've been seeing a lot of does, no bucks on them whatsoever. And the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I got off work. It's probably maybe 10 minutes from my workplace. I usually stop by and hunt for a little bit before I go home. That evening, like I always, see a bunch of does in the field, and was starting to leave to get in my truck. Happened to glance up on the hill and see a bunch of does, and all of a sudden I seen something had horns. So I kind of caught my eye. That day I didn't have binoculars, so I got my gun out of the truck and threw my gun up, and all I could see was horns, and I was tore all to pieces. Because the neighbor, I asked him if he'd been seeing any deers, which I think he kind of lied to me. He said he's been there 10 years, only seen one buck, but that's besides the point.
Right.
But after it was said and done, after I killed it, I found out that a lot of people in that area had been seeing him. But like I said, I have never saw him. But back to the story that evening I watched him to the scope, and it was so dark. I wanted to shoot, but I was afraid to shoot because it was getting kind of dark. I could see him through my scope, but I couldn't get my crosshairs on him. So I watched him till it was completely dark. And the funny thing about it was he got close to my truck. He was about 20 to 30 yards from my truck. So I was like, how am I going to get in my truck without spooking it? So I crawled on my belly for probably 40 to 50 yards and got to the truck. And all I heard was horns clashing. It was fighting another buck, which it tore me up even more. So I finally crawled in my truck. And as soon as I clicked the door, I spooked him. He took off flying. I said, well, I'll never see that deer again. And that was on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I went back Wednesday to hunt again that evening. Didn't see no deer and didn't see a doe. So I was kind of disappointed. So Thursday morning, Thanksgiving, I told my wife, I said, I'm going to hunt for a little while before we had dinner. And pulled into my hunting spot. My lights hit the field. And all I seen was horns. And I was like, oh, my gosh, he's back.
Right.
So I put my boots on, didn't even grab my fanny pack, just grabbed my rifle, took off cutting through the woods, did my stand. And didn't even get to my stand because he done passed my stand. So I laid at the edge of a cornfield, and 76 yards, it come out. I seen the horns. It was daylight. It was like 15 minutes till 7. Put my crosshairs on him, pulled the trigger. He dropped straight down. Shot him 300 Win Mag. Then I went and got it. I was tore all to pieces, seen the horns, the biggest deer ever killed in my entire life.
Yeah.
I just grabbed his horns and drug him down next to the creek bottom and raised his leg up to start, field dressed him, and wow, was I surprised. For about 10, 15 minutes, I didn't know what to do. I raised the leg up and looked, make sure I wasn't seeing things. I dropped the leg, raised the leg up, dropped the leg. And finally, the neighbor, he come over and said he'd been watching me through binoculars through the field.
Yep.
Said he'd seen me raising the leg and dropping it. He didn't know what was wrong. And I said, well, you go ahead and take a look at this. Opened his leg up, and he said, holy crap. That's a doe. We got to checking. It was a doe, but it had scent glands like a buck.
Right.
Had been fighting another buck.
Wow.
But I called the game morning, and he was beside himself, too. He told me it was like 1 in 100,000
Right.
deer, I think.
The odds have been got to be very low.
Yeah. He told me it was like, it's not nothing. I asked him what I was calling about was the meat worth eating, you know. It was kind of genetic deformed.
Sure.
And he told me, he said, no, it's just, he said, you got the both worlds. You got a buck head,
Yep.
horns with a doe face and doe meat.
Right.
Because he first asked me if maybe something had been ripped off, like on barbed wire frames. I said, no, buddy, it's slicker than ribbon.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What an interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I killed a unicorn because everybody was showing up at my house looking at it. Couldn't believe it.
How many people showed up to see it?
I'd say probably 10 to 15 people showed up at my house. People I never did know before. Like, where I live beside the main road, and I had to hang up in a tree, and people were just like stopping. And they was like, first thought they were just admiring because it was a nice buck. Then they were seeing it was a doe, and they were like, wow, you have something weird here. I mean, it's not no massive rack, but to me, it's like a world record to me.
All right, thanks to Jonathan Randolph with the story of the 12-point doe. Fantastic story. It's time for Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Sunday hunting closer as bill easily sails through West Virginia Senate. This story was originally featured on the Deer and Deer Hunting website and was reported by Alan Clemens. Sunday hunting in West Virginia has been prohibited for years, but could be closer to a reality after a bill easily sailed through the state Senate and is now in the hands of the House of Delegates. 11 states still prohibit Sunday hunting in some form, even on private land, based on archaic laws dating back decades. Exactly why the prohibitions were put into place in some of those states is unknown or murky at best. Not everyone has the opportunity to hunt during the week. Jobs and family life prevent some folks from going Monday through Friday. They look forward to the weekend and then only have one day because someone, for some reason, believes that they shouldn't be allowed to hunt on their own property on Sunday. West Virginia is on course to right this wrong. Thankfully, the bill approved by a 26-6 margin in its Senate. It would allow Sunday hunting on private lands throughout the state, with public lands still closed on Sunday. Voters approved Sunday hunting, but due to some county laws or regulations, there are still some issues that this new bill should clear up. It's expected to be taken up in the House and will hopefully pass there and be signed into law. Along with hunters, the bill has the backing of the National Rifle Association, the West Virginia Citizens Defense League, along with the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources and West Virginia Division of Tourism. More than $600,000 in revenue could be generated if this bill is approved. Antietam National Battlefield using sharpshooters to control deer herd. This story was originally featured on the HeraldMailMedia.com website and was reported by Sherry Greenfield. Some 155 years after the bloodiest one-day battle of the Civil War was fought on Antietam National Battlefield in Sharpsburg, the Park Service finds itself in a new fight, controlling the growing number of white-tailed deer there. Over the last few months, the National Park Service has been using qualified and experienced sharpshooters to reduce the number of deer roaming the battlefield. It is the first time the Park Service has used sharpshooters in an effort to preserve the landscape from the damage caused by the growing deer herd. The deer program, approved by the Park Service in 2014, is needed to protect and restore the native vegetation that includes the pasture land and crop fields available at the battlefield for farming. The mission of the operation, which is expected to wrap up soon, is to preserve and restore the type of landscape that was prevalent on September 17, 1862, the day of the pivotal battle. Similar operations are also being conducted at Monocacy National Battlefield in Frederick, Maryland, and Manassas National Battlefield in Virginia. Park officials who conducted a deer population survey in the fall of 2015 determined that there were about 200 deer per square mile, or 600 deer on the battlefield, according to Park Service documents. That is up from a 2011 survey that found about 130 deer per square mile, or 390 deer on the battlefield. The goal of the Park Service is to reduce the rate to 15 to 20 deer per square mile, which could take 3 to 5 years to achieve. The Park Service and the U.S. Department of Agriculture have worked to ensure public safety during the time sharpshooters are at the battlefield, the document said. Hunters are not allowed along the park boundary, open roads, and occupied buildings. Instead, they shoot from an elevated position, such as hilltops or truck beds. The ammunition they use does not contain lead, and Park Service employees patrol the battlefield during operations. The meat collected is donated to area food banks. Gun legislation could make Michigan the 7th state to allow constitutional carry. This story was originally featured on the OutdoorHub.com website. On February 2nd, 4 Michigan lawmakers introduced bills that would make Michigan the 7th state in the U.S. where constitutional carry is allowed. If the legislation passes, Michigan will join the list of 6 minority states that allow concealed carry without a permit. Currently, concealed handguns without government-issued permits are allowed in Alaska, Arizona, Kansas, Maine, Vermont, and Wyoming. Regulations of the law vary from state to state. For example, in Vermont, you would spend an awful lot of time searching for laws on concealed pistols simply because they aren't in any of the books, making them legal. In Wyoming, however, concealed carry is allowed for residents only. Other states, such as Colorado, are also considering such legislation. This Michigan legislation is only in its beginning phase, so Michiganders will have to wait patiently for word on this one. We will be sure to let you know all the details as it unfolds. Editorial. We did recognize that some of the statistics and states mentioned in this week's story about Michigan's constitutional carry law were not consistent with last week's story about New Hampshire, as well as the information mentioned in last week's editorial. The statistics used in this week's article may be somewhat dated. Please make sure to check the laws in your state or a state you plan to carry in to make sure you have the most current information. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check out our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller with the Deer News. Without further ado, here's Dan Infalt.
Dan Infalt, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Doing good.
Awesome, man.
Thanks for having me on.
We're psyched to have you on. It's long overdue. We've been asked a few times to have you on the show, and your insights into the land of the whitetail world is certainly innovative and extremely insightful. I'm just glad that we finally connected. Dan, where are you right now? Where do you call home?
I'm sitting in my kitchen.
You're in your kitchen. Right.
In Rome, Wisconsin. There's 2 Rome, Wisconsins. I'm in a little tiny Rome. It's not the big Rome. down in southeast Wisconsin, right between Milwaukee and Madison, middle of nowhere.
So there are 2 Romes in Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Well, who thought that up? That's interesting. All right.
I have no idea.
Okay. So you're in the Little Rome. And how'd you end up in Little Rome? Is that the place you grew up in or something that you ended up at?
I grew up about 75 miles from here in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin.
Okay, sure.
And ended up here because I liked the area to hunt. I actually bought a old farmhouse on a swamp that I like to hunt.
Gotcha. All right. So the hunting attracted you to this particular area.
Yeah. So instead of living next to work, I drive an hour to work and live next to where I hunt.
That's a beautiful setup. I like the way you think.
Priorities.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely like the way you think. What's your earliest recollection of your first hunting adventure?
If I think back, I can remember my older brother going out hunting a lot and me wishing I could go along and always envying him and looking at him as a big hunter.
So your earliest recollection is with your oldest brother, and you were a little envious of when he went out. What was the first time that you remember getting a shot on a deer?
Oh, this is going to sound bizarre to you, but it's absolutely true.
Okay.
I think I was about 9 or 10. My brother had gone up north to go deer hunting, and I wanted to go along. And obviously I was too young to go to deer camp with my brother. My dad wouldn't let me go. So he felt bad about it, I think, and he bought me a red bear bow, one of those red fiberglass ones.
Sure.
And some target arrows. I went out back and went hunting. You know, in my mind, I was out there hunting deer. I was crawling through some bushes, and I had my dog with me, and I got into this little opening, and I stood up, and there's this buck standing in front of me, about 3-4 feet in front of me, in this opening staring at me. And he had broken off antlers. They were just like stubby antlers.
Yeah.
I remember staring at him, not knowing what to do, because obviously I was just a little kid. And
right.
The buck turned and ran right at me and hit me in the stomach, and I flew through the air. When I got up, the deer was gone.
Wow.
That's my earliest recollection of actually hunting. A neighbor across the river from us watched the whole thing and called my dad. So my dad was out there before I was off the ground or whatever. And then my dad told some reporter, and it was actually in the newspaper.
No way.
Yeah.
It's. Have you ever told that story before on a podcast?
No, I haven't.
No kidding. All right.
I even have the newspaper clipping still.
That's awesome. What year was that?
In the mid-'70s.
Mid-'70s. So this was your first kind of interaction, sounds like. Did you think that was like an omen for things to come in your life? I mean, you were 9 years old. I can't imagine that you really thought it through that much.
I don't know. You know, as a 9-year-old kid, at first you're a little mad about the whole thing.
Right.
But then it's kind of cool that you got this story, you know.
I don't know too many people have been run over by a whitetail before, much less a whitetail buck. I mean, I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. But a 9-year-old boy to get run over by a buck, to imagine the career and that you've had in hunting since then. I think it kind of set the stage. I wish I got run over by a buck.
Maybe it's revenge.
Maybe it's revenge. It could be. Maybe it's just so embedded in your head because of that scarring moment back when you were 9 that you've never been able to let it go. Very interesting. Well, since then, you've been known as one of the best deer hunters in America, really. And I don't know if you think of it that way. Sounds like you're kind of a humble guy and really just doing your thing. But I think a lot of people hold you in high regard as far as a skill set in deer hunting and the things you've learned over the years. And it seems like deer hunting in general is not something you learn all at once. It's more or less a journey. And you're not going to learn all the things you know today all in one hunt. You become a student of the whitetail in the woods that they live in. Can you identify some of those little lessons that you've learned since that first encounter when you were 9 years old in the 70s? Some things that kind of stick out?
You know, I think a big part of it is the way I think about hunting and in my background. Is that when I came of age to hunt, my brother moved out of state, and my father didn't hunt. He worked 2 jobs so that we could live in the country because he wanted to get us out of the city.
Okay.
So I really didn't have a mentor.
Gotcha.
And I learned how to hunt on my own.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
I would go out through trial and error and learn to hunt. So I didn't learn the little I want to say bad habits. Maybe they're not bad, but the habits of other people.
Right.
And when you look around at you at the way people hunt, what I see is a lot of people have the same mindset, the same way of thinking, and do everything the same. And I never had that. I never learned things from somebody else. I went in the woods and learned them from the animals. And I always felt inferior to the animals. And when I'd be out there hunting deer, I would be watching them and paying attention to what they're doing. And I think other people see deer. A deer came by. I see a deer that the wind's blowing across the feeding area, and he turns and he puts his back to the wind and turns himself around so that he's looking downwind while he feeds. And I'm noticing things like that, where somebody else just saw a deer they're eating.
Right.
I think I'm always trying to learn from what they're telling me, and I think that other people don't do that. I think they just get excited about seeing a deer and looking at it, and they just follow the old magazine quotes and stuff that everybody does.
Right. You started with a clean slate. Everybody else who has had a mentor, and not that mentors are bad, because they certainly have taught many people how to hunt, but it sounds like you had the clean slate, and your observation skills seem a little more keen than most, as you just described. A lot of hunters would just see a deer moving through, but you took time to stop and watch. Now, what do you think causes that? I mean, what is that your nature? Is that just kind of the way you think in general?
Yeah, I think it just is my mindset, the way I look at things.
I agree with you. I think that's made a big difference in the way you've developed your skills. Let's get into a little bit about kind of your claim to fame, and that's hunting public lands and hunting buck beds. When did you first start hunting public lands, and why not hunt somewhere else?
When I first started hunting public land, it was when I first started hunting. And I had a lot more private land back then, but I went to wherever the deer were. You got to go back in time, too. If you go back to the 70s, 80s, there weren't the deer there are now. There was very few like trophy class animals. And if you wanted to go after a big animal, you had to go where one lived.
Right.
And seek that deer out. If it was on public land or if it was on private land or where it was, you went to. And if you sat on the same property all the time, you hunted whatever was there. So if you wanted to seek something big out, you had to go seek it out. Where nowadays, there seems to be big bucks on all the properties,
Right. Gotcha. And so the 70s kind of set you up that way, it sounds like. This is a part of your experience, part of the things that you kind of keyed on is that you had to go where the big bucks were. I mean, it's kind of rule number one, right? If you want to shoot a big buck, you have to go where they are. It's kind of a basic rule of the woods. If it's impossible to shoot a big buck if they're not there. Kind of rule number one.
Right.
What is it about the beds or hunting beds that you key in on? What is it that intrigues you about them, and why hunt buck beds?
Okay. See now, I never got that whole, thing where everybody tells you to stay away from the buck beds and stuff, the mentors and stuff.
Right.
I never heard any of that. So what I noticed in hunting right from the get-go was that if you hunted by fields and stuff, you weren't seeing them until after dark. And the closer you got to that where that deer was bedded, or the closer to the thicket, think of when I first started hunting. I don't think you quite put it together with the beds yet, but you're looking at the deer lives in that thick spot. And when he comes out, he only gets 100 yards in daylight. So, you just keep inching closer and closer and closer until you get the confrontations. And after a while, you learn that, hey, the closer I am to where he is in daylight, the more daylight shots I get, And then from there, it just kept morphing,
Gotcha. So you just figured out that if I can get closer to the bucks as I'm finding them appearing, then I'm going to have a better shot the closer I can get. Let's talk about buck beds for a little bit. There are obviously multiple types of buck beds. There are multiple beds. There are doe beds and buck beds. How do you tell the difference between the two? And what do you key in on to decide whether it's a buck that's worthy of hunting versus one that's not?
That could morph into a million answers. But
yes.
Basically, do your first question, doe bedding versus buck bedding.
Okay.
Does will bed in buck beds if they're like solitary does or one or two does.
Okay.
But for the most part, a doe group will bed in a more open area with a little less regard to the wind, and will bed in a circle, all looking out in a different direction.
Right.
They work as a team. A buck is a solitary animal who worries about number one. He's not worried about any other animal in that woods, where the doe's worried about the group. When a buck beds, he's going to try and put his back up against something. He's going to have the wind to his back. He's going to be looking ahead of him. And he's going to have everything covered from one position. And that might sound kind of basic, but when you walk into, an average buck bed, you might be like, I don't know if it's a buck bed or a doe bed. But when you walk into a mature buck's bedroom, most of the time you're going to go, wow, this is set up perfect. And when you do that, you're in the right spot.
All right. Can we dig into that a little deeper about the buck's bedroom? What does it look like? And how do you identify it? And we'll get into the rest of those other questions in a bit.
One of the biggest things for me is if you look at a public property, and I think that's mostly what we're talking about. The first thing I do is, number one, not all public properties treated the same. Maybe 1 out of 10 I'll hunt. The rest of them I won't even look at.
Okay.
I live in a very populated area. And for me to be successful in this area where I live, I have to key in on water. Okay. That's not true everywhere I hunt. I mean, I get in the hills, it's a little different. But right where I live, I have to key in on water. Because what happens is this area is so pressured that there's hunters on everything that's dry. They cover everything.
Gotcha.
So bucks bed in water. And they tend to do that anyways, even without pressure, because I think through time, with wolves hunting them, coyotes, and people, they learn that the safest place to be is surrounded by water. Okay, so if I take this public property and I look at it, now I'll mark off every place I think people go. And I'll probably mark off 90% of that map.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm looking at that aerial and I'm marking off everything where I think people go on a regular basis.
Okay.
And I'll have, say, 5% or 10% of that map that ain't marked.
Yeah.
That's what I'll go scout. And most of the time, that's where I'll find the biggest bucks in the property. And it's not places most of your listeners would think. A lot of times, it's right alongside the parking lot. It's, right alongside the road. And think about it for a second. Now, who goes and hunts public property, goes in from the parking lot, and walks beside the road and hunts 100 yards up from the parking lot?
Right.
Nobody.
It's not your first instinct.
And that's why the buck's there.
Right.
And you think, well, that's a stupid spot for a buck to be. But if it's got the cover they need and nobody goes there, that's where he's going to be. And the reason is they don't think about a spot. They smell it. So they're going based on smelling human activity, coyote activity, pressure. So if that spot's got the activity or the lack of activity from humans, that's where I want to be.
Okay.
And believe it or not, the majority of my biggest bucks that I've shot on public land were shot within 100 yards of the road.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I've killed a few way back in these islands, way back in the middle and stuff.
Yeah.
But the very biggest and oldest ones I've ever shot, when you get to the few real monsters I've taken, most of them are right alongside highways. But just 2 years ago, I got my kid a buck that I'd been watching. I set him up on it. It was 165 inches.
Yeah.
He shot that thing about 50 yards from a parking lot with about 50 cars in it.
That's very interesting. So how detailed do you get on your map? And how big is this map? Is it of the town? And then you start kind of coring off places where hunters generally go? And like how far in between are the X's that you're marking on these maps?
Well, I look at in between roads usually. I'll look at a square chunk.
Okay.
It might be like the swamp behind my house, for instance. It's an average swamp that I'll look at. It's 2,300 acres.
Okay.
So I'll look at something that size and start marking things off.
Okay, so you got a map of the 2,300 acre swamp, and you're going to start marking a couple X's here, a couple X's there, based off of your visual observation of what you've seen, or.
Well, when I mark off where people are going, basically everything dry that's got a path going in from the parking lots is wiped out.
Gotcha.
It has to be hard access, or it has to be a tangle or something. When I think of the marsh behind my house, if I go back here and I would look at it during gun season, now I would know this just looking at the property, but maybe some people wouldn't.
Right.
If I go back to gun season and I look around, every piece of dry land that you can walk to from the parking lot has orange every 40 yards.
Right.
I mean, a deer. How can a guy in the middle of that even think a deer can get to him? I have no idea.
Right.
But I walked past these people, and I walked down into the cattails and into the swamp. And as soon as I hit water up to the top of my boots, there's no more orange. There's no people anywhere.
Gotcha.
And I go out there, and I'm seeing deer like crazy. There's one spot in the marsh by my house where in the same year, for 6 years in a row, I shot a trophy buck on opening day, and it's 100 yards from a parking lot.
Wow.
The main parking lot, as a matter of fact.
But it's
it's a matter of mindset and getting yourself out of those ideas. I think most people watch TV shows and they watch these hunting shows and stuff and videos.
Yeah.
And they get the mindset that they got to be hunting over a food plot or,
Sure.
Everybody that asks me about hunting, well, here's where the food is. What do I care where the food is? There's food everywhere. Deer don't just eat, corn and beans, and they eat browse and stuff too.
Right.
And when they get to that cornfield, it might be the middle of the night.
That's right. And when nobody's around.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. That's fascinating. Okay, so you really do take to the map and look at all the dry spots and X them all off. And it sounds like, so water is your friend, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And would this apply to anywhere in the country for the most part, other than maybe out west where there is very little water? But like from Wisconsin east?
Yeah, I would say. Most places, water's your friend. Swampy, wet areas. Bucks historically like the safety of being on a dry hump surrounded by water.
Right.
I mean, a coyote or a wolf won't go through that water to get at them. They don't go out there till it's frozen. So they got it pretty much made. So a wolf don't go out there, a coyote don't go out there, and people don't go out there.
Right.
Why wouldn't they be out there? But as far as everywhere, no. I mean, you get some areas like in more western or south, or like Ohio, parts of Iowa, parts of Illinois, western Wisconsin, that are very hilly and don't really have a lot of that swamp, or they have some of that swamp. Well, then they bed up in the hills. That's a little different.
So in your area in Wisconsin, this is what you've noticed as a pattern, and you've keyed on that pattern to try to get closer to the deer, where the deer go when everybody's staying on every dry piece of land that's around. That makes total sense.
Right.
All right. Let's go back to the beds for a little bit, buck beds. How do you identify the buck bed from the doe bed? You said that you have a circle of does, and that the buck is on an isolated bed all to himself. Let
me go off on a little bit of a tangent here. So we go out into a big swamp. I can think of one right down the street here that's like a tamarack swamp that has a lot of dogwood, a lot of tamarack, some islands out there. A lot of it's underwater.
Yep.
You get out there, and there are beds everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's beds. And the average guy would look at that and go, well, Dan Infault's nuts. How do you hunt this?
Right.
Well, for me, it's simple, because all those beds are meaningless unless they're in the right land features.
Okay. All right.
So those big bucks are going to be at the tips of islands where they taper down into dogwood. They're going to be at little points that go out into the cattails. They're not going to be out in the middle of the crap. The big bucks are going to be on the right land features that funnel in the wind and stuff. So the little tapers down of brush, little fingers and stuff that end in dogwood in the swamp, they'll be bedding there.
Okay.
If you have a large lone tree out in dogwood, right at the base of that tree, because there's going to be a little high spot there that's going to create a perfect bedding spot.
Okay.
But they really like those tapering down points that come off of this. Like if you look at the edge of a swamp, so you got hardwoods meet the swamp, okay?
Yep.
And the swamp is thick, so they're going to bed on that transition line where the swamp meets the woods. As soon as you get a little point or finger of land that's a little bit higher up that goes out into that swamp, right on the tip of that is where that biggest buck around is going to be bedding.
Okay. Gotcha.
And all the other bucks still need some place to bed, and all the other deer. And those are what I call satellite deer.
Okay.
They'll bed around the outskirts.
Gotcha. And when you're looking at the maps again?
Yeah, I can see them on a map. On a swamp, what I'm looking at, or a swamp or a marsh, I'm looking at aerials. And I'm studying them really close. By the shapes of the trees, I can see if it's high ground or low ground. You can see water. For a beginner, the easiest one to look at, the absolute easiest land to read is a marsh, a cattail marsh.
Yep. Because
you can see the features so well.
Okay.
So if you look at a cattail marsh and you see a little point of trees going in, I mean, you can't miss it on an aerial because especially if you go through the aerials. Like I use Google Earth, and it's got a timeline on the bottom you can click on where you can change the dates of the pictures.
Gotcha. Okay.
When you do that, if you can find a fall picture where the cattails are brown and the leaves are green,
yep,
it'll stand out like a sore thumb. And if you learn it in the cattail marsh, it's the absolute same thing in a swamp. But in the swamp, people get overwhelmed because they see all this dogwood and stuff and they can't see through it. But if you look at it from above, you can see those same features. Just imagine the dogwood and brush being cattails.
Okay. Gotcha.
But those little fingers that come off of the shoreline, if you want to call it that,
yep,
or off the tip of an island, or those little clumps of lone trees that are out there. You see one or two trees together on the cattails. Those are the spots where those big bucks are going to be bedding.
Okay. All right, so this raises an interesting question, is that you're talking about getting into some places that other people won't go, and you're talking about points in a swamp that we're holding these big bucks. How do you get to those spots? Or let's back up. What's your strategy for hunting those areas if you know they're bedding there? And how do you get in and out of the swamps itself to the point where you're comfortable enough to get in and out where others won't?
I've never had a problem with it, but I do go out hunting with other people that do seem pretty intimidated by it, but I've been doing it for years. Okay. The ones that are along the edge are obviously easy. If you're bedding on a finger of hardwoods going into the marsh, they're going to walk up that finger towards the hardwoods before they disperse. That's easy.
Okay.
And the guy can even hunt that just by walking that hardwood edge with a stand on his back until he finds rubs coming out, setting up on it. Then the next day, sitting up on the next one, without ever scouting the beds. But if they're coming out near shore, obviously, you just take the hardwoods right up to the edge. The trouble with that is the most often time those fingers or points get bedded on is when the wind's blowing right down them. That's when they feel the safest to bed on the end of that point.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what you need is a just off wind where it's blowing down the point, but if you get around to the other side of the point at the mouth, your wind's actually blowing out over the cattails, not to him.
Okay.
So you got to kind of play that wind a little bit. But as far as navigating into the swamps, I've got a canoe, I've got a kayak that's rigged to put a stand on it and stuff. And in a lot of cases, I just get wet. I just go out there and walk through the crap. Gotcha. You can't walk through, if it's cattail marsh, you can't walk through solid cattails. You have to navigate on deer trails because it gets so thick you can't get through them. But that's another thing about cattail marsh is a lot of guys don't know. When you look at those aerials,
yep,
if you zoom way in, you can see the deer trails. And those deer trails are in the same spots year after year.
Fascinating. All right, so you're using some buoyant contraption, whether it's canoe or kayak in some cases, but it sounds like you're just getting wet. You're just going for it.
Yeah, most of the time.
Okay. Well, what do you have a specific gear that you use, even though you're getting wet, that it doesn't bother you if it's a cold day and you're sitting and you're actually got soaked? Do you have specific gear that you use?
Yeah, not really. I just dress like any other hunter. A lot of times, if I got to cross a creek or canal, believe it or not, I strip, carry my stuff over my head across the river.
Okay. And
then get redressed because I'm putting dry clothes back on it, and you stay warm. But as far as gear, I mean, I'm a minimalist. I have a bow, and arrows. I don't have a backpack or a fanny pack or anything like that.
Yeah.
I never bring food with me. None of that stuff. I have in my safety harness vest, I have a pocket for my rope. Okay. I have a pocket for my flashlight. I have a pocket with a compass in it.
Okay.
And I have a knife in my pocket usually, and that's about it.
Okay. Gotcha.
Stand on my back with sticks. The only thing I take that I probably don't need to take is my camera gear. But
okay. Gotcha. So no food, no water?
Not very often. Maybe if it's really hot, sometimes.
Okay. All right. So you're really just getting it down to the very basic stuff that you're going to need. And it doesn't sound like you're getting into these areas of big wilderness terrains or anything where you could get lost. Sounds like you can kind of get in and out of these areas, not easily, but it doesn't sound like you're too far from a place.
Yeah, most of the stuff in southern Wisconsin, I mean, you can get turned around, but I mean, an hour of walking and you're hitting a road someplace.
You're hitting a road. Okay.
I mean, that's not to say I don't go up to the wilderness and hunting, northern Minnesota and stuff too. But around here, no, you really can't get lost. You can get into trouble with the marsh. I mean, you can get into a spot where you can't navigate across.
Sure.
But you just turn around and go the other way.
Right. But generally, you know where you are. I mean, not that you can't turn around, but you kind of know, like, I'm generally in the right spot. If I travel that direction, I'm get out of here somehow.
Well, generally, I got a compass in my pocket, and I've already studied a map, so I know which way I got to go to get out of there.
You're familiar with the area, very, very much so. Okay. So, how familiar are you with the areas that you're hunting? Now that we're talking about that, it sounds like you've studied like every nook and cranny of a lot of these places, and you know where to set up and where not to.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, there are properties out here that I know. I mean, you could drop me off in there blindfolded, and I could feel a tree and tell you where I'm at. But I also have a passion for new spots. Gotcha. I think once I figure out a woods, I know how to hunt that woods, and I can kill the biggest animal in it. It gets boring. I want to move on and try something new, and I'm constantly trying new properties, and I like to figure them out. And especially if there's something really big and intriguing, you find some big buck someplace, and you just go out and go after them.
You know, it's funny, you're not the first really good hunter to say that, where you learn a property so well, it's holding a big buck, but it's not different. It's not new. It's something that you've done before. So it's not as intriguing.
It's not really about the kill anymore.
Right.
It might sound funny. I think when you start out and you're young, you kill that giant buck and you put it on your wall and you come in the room every day and stare at it.
Yeah.
I don't even keep my deer heads at my house or at a taxidermy shop in a couple towns over. I never even think about the deer that I've killed. I'm always thinking about the next one. And to me, it's the challenge. It's the pursuit. It's not really the kill. And I know a lot of people say that, but I think most people say that because it's the right thing to say.
Right.
But to me, it really is more about the pursuit. I can have a confrontation with a giant buck that I'm hunting, and he gets away, and I'm kind of rooting for him. It sounds funny, but I enjoy the hunt. And I can think of a couple seasons recently where I shot a decent buck that wasn't all that huge early. And when I should be joyous, I'm feeling a little bad that I'm done. And, I'm thinking about, where am I going to have to run to Illinois or Iowa, or where am I going to go now? I like the pursuit. I like the chase, the challenge. And I like those bucks that are a little harder to figure out, that are giving you a challenge or giving you the slip. And you have to go in there and new area and read the land and figure it out. And to me, that there's a passion in that. And I don't think everybody's going to quite get that.
I get it. I think that a lot of listeners will get it. Did you have that same perspective earlier in life, or is this something that?
Oh no, not at all. It's a progression, right. And I think a lot of things have changed. And I think they do with everybody. I think there's a lot of stages you go through as a hunter, and some of them get through more than others. I mean, some people never change, and some people are constantly changing.
When you go to look at a new area, you're excited. You figured, hey, this is a place I haven't been. It's new terrain. What's your first step?
My first step is usually to study maps and try to figure out what's going on there. And if I have the opportunity, I want to go in there and spring scout this time of year, really learn that land inside out, look for those land features I was talking about, look for the little holes where I think this thing's hiding, and try and figure it out, pick out some trees and stuff now, and really learn that land, and then come back later in fall and catch them off guard. One buck that comes to mind was 2 years ago. I drew a bear tag for northern Wisconsin up in the Northwoods. So I went up there and set up some bear baits, and what do you think shows up on one of my bear baits in an area that has hardly any big bucks?
Of course, the biggest buck you've ever seen.
Yeah, and I got to watch him grow. He was actually eating out of my bear bait. He would knock the cover off, and there's something in there he liked. I think it was pita bread. And I watched this thing grow up on my camera to the point where it had 18 points. It would obviously score well over 200. And I got millions of pictures of this thing. And you're not allowed to bait deer in Wisconsin. So I contacted the DNR up there.
Yep.
I said, here's the situation. And he says, my bear bait's legal? He says, you can hunt around it. I went up there opening day. I had that thing at 10 yards and it busted me. And I spent the rest of the season going up there playing cat and mouse on weekends trying to get this thing.
Yeah.
Never did. But to me, that's as exciting as a hunt where I killed a giant buck.
Right.
It was that pursuit, that new area, that whole, trying to figure this out from 4 hours away,
The cat and mouse game. That's what keeps you going,
yeah.
right? That's what keeps you going back until till you've done it once or twice and had success, then you move on, sounds like.
That's what keeps it exciting. If you went to the same tree all the time, if you figured out some perfect tree to kill a deer, and every year if you went there, on the 10th of October, you'd kill this giant buck, would it be fun?
No.
Not for me.
No,
it wouldn't.
No, it wouldn't be fun. The first time, yes. The second time, probably. But after a while, you got to move on. You got to find some new spots. Let's go back to the buck bed again. How do the bucks treat their beds? The bucks that you're in pursuit of. Have you noticed anything over the years as to how they get into their beds, they get out of their beds, how they use them, how often do they use them, what time of day do they come in and out of those things? What have you observed over the years?
Okay, well, I'm always learning.
Right.
Lately, I've been learning by friends that have been putting cameras on beds and getting pictures and time frames and stuff. Huh. And some of the revelations that come out of that have been surprising to me based on my own observations. But what I see bucks do is when they come out of a bed, they got no regard for the wind. They go from point A to point B.
Okay.
But if they get the wind in their favor, they seem to get a little further. What I am seeing is a lot of times those mature bucks are barely getting 100 yards out of that bed in daylight. And
gotcha.
For the guy that's hunting the rub line in the middle of the woods, good luck.
Right. He's not there.
A lot of the ones that I've shot, I've watched get out of their beds, and I shoot them 75 yards from their bed, and it's closing time.
Gotcha.
75 yards ain't far. But they always seem to get out in daylight, hang around the bed, but they don't get far in daylight.
Okay.
In the morning, on contrary, they do have a regard for the wind. They tend to circle around to the downwind side, smell for a little bit, and then go straight into the wind to that bed. And most of the early season, you'll see your mature bucks bedded well before daylight.
Okay.
I struggled with that for years, trying to hunt them in the morning because I would hunt every day. When I was younger, I was really aggressive. I've tamed down a lot, but I used to hunt almost every day of the season. And I'd hunt mornings and evenings and find some job that would put up with me, even though it paid half the wage I needed.
Right.
But,
right.
It's a different world, different time, and I've grown up a little. I would go into those beds in the morning, and I'd go sneaking in there an hour to hour and a half before daylight. It was pitch black out, and listen to that buck jump out of his bed and crash off. And I had very little success in the morning. It's not that I didn't have any, but it was little success, and I'd ended up ruining some really good beds because I'd kicked the deer out of there, because you really get like one or two cracks on these beds, and you need to move on.
Right.
It ain't like hunting where a guy puts a stand up and sits it every Saturday or something.
Okay.
But anywho, they go in there before daylight, bed down, and they go wind to nose into those beds. So sitting over the top of that bed really ain't an option unless you get lucky with the way the wind flows and it goes over them or something, because he's going to try and smell that bed before he goes in there. And if when he's circling, he crosses your scent trail, that's tough. Now, when rut comes, then they start bedding in daylight. For me, that's in Wisconsin, that's usually around a little after October 15th, I start seeing them getting back to those beds in gray light.
Okay.
So for me, hunting the beds is more about evenings, especially outside of the rut.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're saying that they're entering these beds before daylight, and I think a lot of us think that when they see light, they're heading to their beds. But in fact, you're saying they get there before the light even comes up.
Yeah, and I can tell you there's been beds that I hunted that are on islands in the middle of a cattail marsh where the island's out almost a mile from shore. And I get out there and they jump out of their bed before daylight and take off.
That's crazy.
So I think they got like an internal clock of some sort, to be honest with you.
It sounds
I don't know exactly how it works. I know what you're saying because I kind of had that mindset too when I was young. But the observations don't lie. It happens over and over and over again.
You'd think that they would key off of the sunlight and the environment, but there's something else, it sounds like, going on there, like you said, an internal clock. And who knows, this is thousands of years of evolution here that we're trying to fight.
Right.
Right.
And contrarily, I mean, in the evening, it almost seems like they know better than to walk around in daylight, but they really want to come out. They're hungry. They really want to come out of there, and they get up and they kind of pace around and stage your way out. So to me, evenings are a little easier. You don't have that walking into the wind to the bed. When you look at a bedding area, you're going to find trails coming out of it. And your average guy is going to go, okay, is this an entrance trail or an exit trail?
Gotcha.
Well, when they come in with wind to nose, that entrance trail changes constantly. So any beat trail you see is an exit trail.
Very interesting. So knowing all this stuff, what's your setup like? You're going in the swamps, you're getting wet, you're carrying minimal gear. Are you doing a stand setup? Are you on the ground? How do you plan for that day?
I've got a small stand. I've actually got one I made myself now. I was using Lone Wolf for many years.
Okay.
And now I made myself one that's real lightweight. Made my own sticks and stuff. And I got everything silenced. I go in and I get to about 75 yards from that bed. I go real slow. And this is in swamps. And, obviously in the hills and stuff, I can't get 75 yards from a bed. Usually you're about 200 yards from it. But in the swamps, I can get about 7,500 yards from a bed. And I slide up a tree, and I'm just really quiet and slow about how I do it. One thing that helps me is when I have the opportunity to spring scout at this time of the year, is I go to where those beds are, and I look from the deer's point of view out, and I think, okay, how far can he see? How far can he hear? And what is he smelling from here?
Okay.
And I want to get right to the edge of that sight, sound, and smell range. And that's where I want to set up.
Okay. Gotcha. So when you're scouting in the spring, you're actually going and scouting during the day, obviously, and you're finding some of these beds. Is that what you're looking for generally when you scout, or are these beds themselves?
Yeah, I look at I'm going straight to the land features that hold the beds.
Okay.
And then I'm looking at the beds, making sure they're actually where I expect them to be. And then I'm looking at from there, what can you see? The hardest thing your listeners are going to have is actually seeing the bed at this time of the year. They're not easy to see at this time of the year if the deer aren't using them. Like, for instance, the marsh that I hunt behind my house here, the deer aren't wintering in the marsh. They're wintering out in the fields and stuff. As soon as it freezes up, they come out of there. Gotcha.
All right, so it's not going to look the same come the fall. How do you know?
Experience. I think you got to put some time into it.
Okay.
This isn't something that your readers are going to listen to me for half an hour and be an expert at. It's something that's going to take some time. You got to put some work into it, some effort. I'd like to say, here's a quick answer, but there isn't one.
Right. I'm playing devil's advocate here, but it sounds like this is, scouting is great, and it's great if you scout for a little bit, but it's better if you scout over years of time. And scouting and learning the strategies of these whitetail in this particular area, it can't be just, a one day scout and then you figured it out. What I found, and you may agree or disagree, to me, it could be 10 years of scouting an area before you've kind of cracked that code, after you figure out where they tend to be. And
I wouldn't say 10 years, but what I would say is after 10 years, you're going to be a hell of a lot better than you were the first year. I think it's a progressional thing, and for every person, it's going to be a little different. I'm scouting all year, all season. The best scouting I've ever done, or that has done the most for me, has been when I tagged out early, and I went in the swamps and checked the beds, or up in the hills and checked the beds. At the time of the year, I'd normally be hunting.
Okay.
Or if I'm on a road trip, the day I'm leaving and I'm already, I'm done. I'm not going to hunt this spot again. I'm still going to hunt one more day or something, but I'm hunting over there, and it's midday. Yeah. I'm going to go in and look and see if that buck was bedding there. See this. And that's another thing I do. If I see a buck during the season, I go back later, and I will backtrack him and find out where he came from. Find out if he was bedded in there. Find out exactly what he was doing there. It'll bother me. I don't just see deer.
Right. Gotcha. So if you get a visual on a buck, you're going to go back and investigate what the heck he was doing there in the first place.
Right. I mean, I'm not do it that day because I'm still hunting them and I don't want to spook them.
No. But you'll go back.
But I'm going back. You bet.
You've made an earmark, a check mark to say, I've got to go back and check out this particular area as to why he was there and learn.
Right. And I'm thinking about one from 2 years ago. I was hunting with Mario on his conservancy property. It's a swamp with little islands in it. It's really thick and nasty. Yep. And I went to cross this island coming out, and it was just littered with huge rubs, and they weren't there a couple weeks ago. And I called Mario up, and I said, hey, you should get out on that island and give that a shot, because I was done in there. And he went out there and sat there, and he had this huge buck come in and bust him. After the season, I said, let's go out there and see where that thing came from. And what we learned is we knew doe bedding was right across from him. We figured bucks were cruising there and the rubs were there because of the doe bedding.
Yep.
Well, when we backtracked, what we found was a big rut bed where this buck had a bed with all these rubs in the trees around this bed, where he had a little tunnel of vision watching where the does came out of the doe bedding area and went to that island.
Yep.
And what he had was, when he was sitting there, this doe came out, and then all of a sudden he heard some grunts, and from an angle, this buck came out. And we found where the thing was laying. And sure enough, we went back in there this year, and there's a buck bedded in the exact same spot watching those does.
Gotcha.
So now we know that's a rut bed, and that's where bucks sit to watch that doe bedding area. And if you went there now, no bucks have bedded there since November. You can hardly see the bed, but it's there.
Gotcha.
If you get a good eye at it. But, that's a lesson you learn from backtracking those deer, after you see them.
Gotcha. All right. So backtracking deer sounds like a good technique, and you're scouting all year long, even during the season, even during the day in which you're hunting. You're touching on spots that you may not hunt, but you're scouting all the time. It doesn't really stop. You're always learning where the next good spot might be, and learning how the terrain and their travels might be affected in that one area and why they're there. That's fascinating. How long after Mario got busted by that buck did you wait before you went to go investigate that area and find out more?
That wasn't until probably December when he was done hunting.
Okay, gotcha. So it was about a month and a half later that you guys went back out to investigate. Fascinating. And this is a routine for you. This is something that you do often.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Absolutely.
Here's a question for you, Dan. You've got a buck that you know is in the area. You've scouted the area. You're confident that there's a buck bedded down. And it's one that you'd be happy to take. What goes through your head the night before the hunt as you're laying down on your pillow? What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about the wind direction. I'm thinking about where I think he's at. And I'm contemplating my second moves, too, if he's not, or if the wind's wrong. Where would I go if the wind's off a little bit, or this or that? I can think of a buck I hunted last year. I don't know if you saw that video, Chasing a Dream.
Okay.
That was about the hunt for this giant rumor buck that I'd heard about. Somebody told me they saw a buck that was over 200 inches in this swamp. And the person who saw it was done there, and I was going in, and I went where he left off. And my first thoughts were, okay, I'm going to go where he saw this buck. He saw it on a travel pattern, and I was trying to put some pieces together. Okay, why did he see it there? What was going on? And I assumed it was bedded in front of him, and that it was a morning hunt, and that he had heard some grunting and stuff off to his left and heard something. So I'm figuring it came in from that way. So what I did was the next morning, I went to the spot where he saw it. And one thing I do in these swamps, now this swamp had another guy hunting it, and that guy was real aggressive, and he was in there all the time, and he knew about the buck too. And he was on top of me all the time.
Okay.
So I really wanted to go to this little point, but I knew if I went to that point, I could see that guy's truck was there when I got there, and I knew he was in the vicinity, and he'd see me walk through the open to get there, and he'd know where I was hunting, and I wanted to keep it kind of low-key where I was going. So instead, I hunted the point where he had heard something grunting on the shoreline. And one thing I do is I always push that transition in a swamp. If you got like a lower swamp that's open and brushy, I make sure I'm on a tree overhanging that, not back 10 yards, so that I can see that whole swamp, so that I can get a visual besides a hunt. So I'm doing a half observation sit, half hunt.
Okay.
And in this case, it paid off. I watched the buck cross a piece of open marsh and go straight for that point where I was going to sit.
Gotcha. Okay.
So then, obviously, my next day, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to that point, and I'm getting here early enough that I'm making sure I beat this other guy so he doesn't know I'm there.
Right.
So, but there was one problem with that, is that when I saw that buck crossing that open, I grunted at him, and his reaction was to turn and run.
Oh.
So obviously he had been grunted at before.
Right.
But I didn't know if it spooked him or not. I had to give it a shot. So the next day I went to that point, and I had several nice bucks come by that point. And there was a hot doe in the area, but that buck was nowhere to be seen. So then I'm thinking, okay, where did he go? So I'm thinking, okay, where's the next most likely spot he is? And what I did was I hopped around that property, and at one point, one area where I was overlooking a piece of swamp, I heard a buck get out of a bed and then rub a big tree, and you could hear heavy antlers on it. And I'm thinking, that's got to be a big buck. Maybe it's him. And he went down through a funnel, and I thought, well, maybe I can cut them off in the morning going back up that funnel. So the next morning I sat over there, and a real nice buck came by, but it wasn't him.
Okay.
It turned out later it was, that the buck had been really exaggerated, and my first glimpse of him was at such a distance that I didn't realize the buck was in the 160s, not the 200s.
Gotcha. Okay.
Basically, I took that swamp apart. It's 2 miles across and about a half mile wide where I could hunt.
Yep.
And I broke that into sections, and I make sure I hunted every section I thought he could be bedding in until I ran across him. And I ran across him 3 times doing that.
Gotcha. And how often did you, or how many different sets did you have before you bumped into him over that amount of time?
Okay, I think I did. It was a 3-week hunt. I was in there for 3 weeks, and I think I hunted about 5 days a week. And I think I hunted one stand twice. Otherwise, everything was a new set. How many times do you hunt a tree that you've hunted before? Probably pretty often, right?
Yeah.
Think about the biggest buck you've ever shot. I can tell you that almost all of my big bucks were taken the very first time I ever sat a spot.
Is that right? Okay. All right. And that's something that you've learned over the years. It seems like, wow, that's a big statement.
They figure you out.
Yeah. So do you feel like it's better to keep them guessing by moving around?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But you also have to have a solid plan about how you move around.
Right.
A lot of guys will look at what I did and go, "Oh, you're nuts. You can do that. You're going to spook all the deer off the property." But yet, who's coming off the property with the buck?
Right.
Right at the end, I ended up shooting a 160-inch buck.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How much can you move around without spooking deer?
You can move around a lot. It's just a matter of really contemplating how you move. Okay. There's places they'll accept you, and there's places they won't.
Gotcha.
When I walk into one of those bedding areas and I hunt right on the edge,
yep.
When they smell I was there, it's done.
Okay.
But when I'm walking that swamp that I was just talking about, there's one trail that all the hunters take when they walk through there. You better believe that's the exact trail I take when I walk through there, and I go as far as I can on that, and then I do my 90-degree and come off of there and hunt. I don't walk the swamp edges and stuff, and where I think that deer could be bedding and spook them. So they're going to accept that people walk on that trail all the time. And if you watch deer, watch your reactions. If you walk a transition in the swamp 100 yards from a trail, watch a deer's reaction when it hits your trail. They freak out.
Right.
Well, watch them when you cross that trail where everybody walks.
Right.
They might sniff it for a second, but they just keep walking, wag their tail, and keep going. Because that's a human trail, and they know it.
Right.
When you get near their bedding area, that's when they feel threatened.
Gotcha. All right. So you're kind of using. Well, these are things you can't see per se. You're aware. You're aware of what they're aware of. You're thinking like a deer in a lot of ways, and then getting to the spots in that they're not expecting you. But you're using the corridors that they know to be true, that are safe, and that they avoid for the most part.
Right.
Fascinating.
And a lot of times too, like this other guy that was hunting that property, I seen in that 3-week period, I seen probably 5 or 6 Pope and Young bucks, and that kid saw one in over a month, and he wasn't hunting much different than me, but he was hunting off of the transition a little further back, and my getting aggressive and getting right on the edge was the difference. I mean, 100 yards from me, he wasn't seeing crap. He's in that woods. Those deer, those big deer, just weren't coming up and running around on the in the woods. You know what I mean? Even with low pressure, they aren't going up in that hardwoods and running around. And the thing is, that kid probably saw way more deer than I did, but I was seeing more big deer.
Gotcha.
And those big deer were traveling through those swamps, not leaving the swamps. And I'm using that as an example, but this is everywhere I go. Is those big deer know better than to travel up on that dry land in daylight, even in rut. The deer I was seeing on the dry land running around like crazy were 1- and 2-year-olds. Occasionally a big deer will get stupid and go up on that dry land and run around, or nobody'd shoot them. But the fact that the biggest stuff stays in them swamps, I can start to look at them swamps on a map during rut and look at how they funnel through them and find little choke points and get inside them swamps and kill them.
Gotcha. That's fascinating. So, I mean, it sounded like this guy was doing almost what you were doing, except that you figured out, I don't know how you figured it out, except for over your experience, that you had to go deeper into the places where the bigger bucks would hang out, and that the dry land
Yeah, he
was not it.
He was hunting mobile. He was hopping around, but here he was limited to a climber, and he had like a cheap portable that he used too.
Okay.
And he had to have a straight tree, and for his climber, he had to have a straight limbless one.
Okay.
And when you get into the swampy sections where those deer were, I'm hunting on the trees that are 3 inches in diameter. They're 8 feet tall. Just standing out like a sore thumb. I'm putting myself in positions that are, most guys would look at that deer, no way would they hunt there. I think to some point, the setups I make where I'm killing these deer out of,
yep.
You'd hate to have the wrong person see you there because they think you're a nut job. But that's where I'm killing them because that's where I got to be, you know?
So you're setting up on 3-inch diameter trees that are only 8 feet tall with a handmade...
There was one setup where I had to pull 3 trees together to have something firm enough to get a stand around.
So now I'm just thinking, your tree stand is capable of handling this. Is it a special design that you put together? Or,
yeah.
It is. All right.
Yeah.
What goes into that? What are you thinking about with that stuff?
Well, it's the modeling of how it attaches to the tree, how it tightens, where the points are, where the base touches the tree so that I can get certain diameters out of it.
Yeah.
And how the bat wing works. The main difference is it's really light.
But you're not looking for these big diameter trees, not even big, but these average diameter trees that are easy for.
I'm looking for them. They're just not there.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. You'd love it if it was there, but that's not where the deer are, and you know that. So you're using what's available. So you're not getting up that high. I mean, these trees are only 8 feet high to begin with. You're getting up 6 feet, maybe, off the ground.
A couple of my sets are one stick. You know, you like to get up to 18 feet if you can.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, you can't.
Right.
You know, it's all relative to what you have.
Okay.
And another thing, what'll get a lot of people is they'll give this a try. And if they're used to hunting food sources like acorn flats and crop fields and stuff, they're probably going to see less deer doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
But I'm seeing more big stuff. But what's going to get them is when they go in and they try this and they spook a deer or two and they blow it. And the buck of their dream jumps up and runs off, and they got a little bit too close, or the buck bedded in a little different bed than where he bedded last time, and you knock them out of there. And to that, what I got to say is, if you're not spooking deer, you're not in the game.
Gotcha.
I didn't kill all those deer I killed by not throwing my stand on the ground, going, "Damn it!"
Right.
a couple times, you know.
All right. So
you've got to push that envelope to the point where you fail in order to succeed.
Gotcha. All right. So you're not perfect. You've failed many times to figure this stuff out, and that's when things started to change for you? Is when you started to?
Well, you know what failing is? Failing is success because it taught you something.
That's right.
There's no reason to get mad. There's no reason to get upset. What'd you learn from that? No matter what failed on you. If it was a squeak of your boot against your cable on your stand, did you learn something from that? Is it going to happen again? If it happens twice, you're an idiot. If it happens once, you learn something.
Right.
You know, so anytime you fail, you should be analyzing that hunt and thinking about why. And vice, every time you succeed, you should be analyzing that hunt and asking yourself why.
Gotcha. Very, very good. Well, Dan, I asked you to think about a deer hunt that you've been on recently. Maybe not recently. Maybe it's a long time ago. Or just a memorable deer hunt. And I was wondering if you could kind of take us down memory lane here and do a little play-by-play. You just kind of took us on a hunt for this other one, but is there another deer hunt in your mind?
Okay. Geez, there's a million of them, but how about the Rome Legend buck? The one that was behind my house here about 3-4 years ago.
Okay.
That was a buck that scored about 160. I had a run-in with him hunting, seen him, and I jumped him out of a bed walking around. And then I started shining. You can shine here. It's legal.
Okay. And
seen him in the fields and started hearing rumors about him all over the place. And the area he was from is one of those areas that I know really well. I've scouted really well. And I know that every time a big buck shows up there, there's one area that's the primary bedding area that the biggest buck will claim. And it's a little hidden spot off to the side where nobody goes. And not hard to get to. But you get in there and you get your scent in there and stuff. You got to go in the way the deer did. You kind of blow it. But what I did know from over time is that there's a rub line about 100 yards away, or a couple hundred yards away, that would open up whenever he was in the area. And or whenever there was a deer using that bedding area, that rub line would open up. So I waited till that rub line opened up because he was seen mostly on the private land side of the road. Okay, so that's where I was glassing him most of the time. So I was waiting for him to come back on my side of the road. And I knew that the year prior, he was on my side of the road bedding in that area because I jumped him the year before during breeding season. So I had the tendency to believe that he was coming over for the girls when rut came around.
Yep.
So I was watching for it. So I started hearing some rumors about people shining them and stuff again. So I took a walk out there and the rub line was opened up. So I grabbed my bow and I went and I set up in a tree. I snuck in there where I was 75 yards from the main bed, but there's probably in that spot, there's probably about 15 beds that bucks use, but there was one that just seemed like the primary one. It always had fresh rubs around it and stuff.
Yep. And
they're all kind of in cattails. You can't see the deer from the tree, but you see the bed because it's kind of open. About, an hour before dark, he stood up in that bed and came to me and I shot him. And I shot him right at closing time. The really exciting part about that is really just knowing there's a buck in that section of property and being able to accurately guess and kill him on one hunt. Basically went in there and guessed what bed he'd be in and shot him when he got up out of that bed. There's something about that that's just exciting and victorious to predict it. It's more than the kill, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What also is interesting about that is that a week later, going through there, I noticed those rubs were still open. We had multiple tags because of the CWD thing, so I still had a tag. So I went and hunted that bed again, and another nice 10-pointer got out of it that I never even knew about.
Wow. That's crazy.
But he didn't come to me. He probably didn't like all the blood and stuff underneath my skin.
Good point. So this is just a read of an area and a timing thing based off of information you were gathering. And you went exactly to the spot where you thought he would be set up, and you set up, and it all just happened. Just exactly as you predicted.
Yep.
That's crazy. That's very cool. I love that. Wow. All right. Dan, I've got 10 rapid fire questions for you here. And I didn't prep you on these because I think they're better off the cuff, and they're just to get to know you a little bit better. So when you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. What's your number one hunting tip of all time?
Push the envelope. Get aggressive.
Push the envelope. I love it. All right. We all have these things, and it sounds like you're a minimalist, so this may not apply to you, but we all have these things that we kind of feel like we need to have with us when we hunt. Maybe they're actually a tool other than your weapon. What's that one thing you got to have with you?
Probably a tree stand. Crutch of mine. I hunt off the ground, but I think that I feel much more comfortable elevated.
Okay, good. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
With hunting, biggest pet peeve.
Just in life, anything. Doesn't have to be about hunting.
in life, disrespectful people.
So how old are you today, Dan?
I'm 50.
You're 50. All right. What would you tell the 25-year-old Dan Infalt, knowing what you know today?
I would tell him that there are things more important in life than hunting, and that I should spend more time with my wife and kids and be a better human and not worry so much about hunting. But you probably wouldn't know me now if that were the
case. That's a good point.
But, I have no regrets for anything I did in life. None at all.
Yeah.
I don't have any regrets. But I do feel that my hunting career was made on the backs of my kids and wife.
Gotcha.
And my family. I can't tell you how many times I was hunting on Halloween when my kids were trick-or-treating with my wife, and how many birthdays I missed because there's some big buck out in the woods. My whole life at 25 revolved around hunting. And this is not coming from my wife or anything. My wife would never say any of this. I took jobs that were half the pay of other jobs because they'd let me get away with coming and going as a pleased to hunt. So,
yep. Gotcha.
I don't know if that'll help any of your listeners. I don't think anybody in that mindset can be changed except for through time.
Right. It's easy to reflect. It's not so easy when you're in the moment. Totally understand.
Right.
All right. You're at a hunting convention somewhere in the world, and a stranger comes up to you and asks you what you do for a living. What do you say?
I tell them I'm a machinist.
Machinist. Okay. All right. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had smoked pork shoulder and venison sausage.
That sounds like a good breakfast. That's excellent. I'm glad it wasn't a shake. That's even better. Very nice. All right, you get your own billboard on the side of any highway that you want. It's a blank canvas. What would you put on it?
I don't know. Donald Trump's already president, so can't go there.
Can't go there. If I say the word successful to you, Who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
Miles Keller. That's one of my heroes.
Okay.
I think back of Miles Keller. I knew the man. He used to come to the booth when I worked with Lone Wolf and talk to me a lot. We even went out to eat a couple times. And what struck me about that guy is he was from an era when you had to go to the buck and hunt him down, kind of like what we discussed earlier.
Right.
And he did it quite well. And for a long time, he had the world's record for the most Pope and Youngs. And I can remember him coming to Wisconsin because he heard about some big 8-pointer and hunting it down and shooting it. And it was a state record for the longest time. That held the Wisconsin state record here.
No kidding.
And he was always humble and modest.
Yep.
And when I look at today's heroes, now I got nothing wrong with these people. I don't have nothing against them, so don't take it wrong.
Right.
But they're deer farmers. They're not hunters.
Right.
They're raising them.
Right.
They're not going out and seeking these animals and hunting them down. And you could take any average Joe with money and buy him that.
Gotcha.
You can't buy him skill. And I really liked Miles. I thought he was a great guy.
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, I haven't heard that name in a while. That's a very good answer. I like it. All right. What's a typical day in your life look like?
A typical day in my life. I get up at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I stumble out to my truck. I drive an hour to work. And I work in a machine shop where I do prototype and design machining,
yep.
Design new products. And I get done working. I drive an hour home. And I get on a computer and I answer people's questions and look at people's maps and edit videos.
Gotcha. Right,
Not exactly where I thought I'd be at this time in my life, but that's where I'm at.
All right. Very good. All right. And what's a typical deer hunting day in your life look like?
A typical deer hunting day. I'm usually planning, plotting, looking at the weather, thinking about the conditions of the day and where I should be, and usually second guessing myself a little bit and changing my mind, and then running out, getting in a tree and sitting until dark, and then stumbling out of the woods, stumbling home.
Gotcha. Those are the 10 rapid fire questions, Dan. I think you did quite well. Which we haven't talked about a bunch of stuff tonight. There are a bunch of other things that I think we need to talk about in the future. We didn't talk about second guessing yourself. You didn't talk about some of your other trials and errors that you might have experienced along the years. We didn't even get into moon phase or killing bucks in certain conditions or barometric pressures or fronts, or we didn't get into any of that stuff. So I think we got to do this again.
Sounds good.
Cool, man. Where can we find more about you, Dan? After we listen to the show, where can we learn more about your tactics and strategies?
Huntingbeast.com. It's a forum that I run.
Okay.
It's got an all-time best tactical discussions post that is just awesome. It's a sticky in the top of the deer forum. Another great way to find out more about me and what we've been talking about is my YouTube channel. Okay. I've got some really good videos on there. You can just Google my name in YouTube and it'll pop right up.
Okay. All right. Very, very good. Well, excellent, Dan. This has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you on my show. I'm sorry Dusty couldn't be here, but it's been just an absolute learning session for me. I've learned a lot from you. I've learned a lot from listening to you on other shows, and I appreciate you coming on our show to hopefully we went a little deeper and get into some other topics. And I just don't think we're done yet. I guess that's where I'm going with that.
Cool. Appreciate it. Appreciate the kind words.
I love listening to Dan. He's just such an insightful hunter, and he learned by trial and error and developed his own style instead of listening to everybody tell him how to do it. And by being extremely inquisitive and extremely observant of the wildlife in which he was pursuing, he was able to come up with his own methodologies, and to this day shoots big deer in public lands. He goes deep into the swamps and actually maps out where all the people are, and he goes where they're not on the map. And guess what's also there? That's where the big bucks roam. So, Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Absolutely, Jay. We sure do.
All right. What do we got?
You know, we talk all we want about food plots.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
To prep that food plot, we need to get that soil sample, get it pulled, and get it shipped out to get it tested. So right now is the time to be pulling your soil samples for your food plots.
Right now. Okay.
Right.
All right. What's that going to do for us right now?
Well, it's going to give you the opportunity to see what your soil needs for maximum potential to produce the best yields of your food plots.
Very nice. Very, very cool. Well, excellent, man. It's been a fantastic show. Love talking to Dan, and thank you for the Chubby Tines tip of the week, as usual. Dusty, where can we find you when we're not hanging out here in the studio?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Facebook, Chubby Tines Outdoors, @ChasingAntler on Instagram, Twitter. Jay, where can people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Best place is jay@bigbuckregistry.com. That's my email address. Please shoot me an email there if you'd like to get some more information about anything or if you have suggestions. If you'd like to join us on the Facebook page, it's facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. If you'd like to submit a buck to the Facebook page, it's bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck. All the instructions will be right there. If you would like to be a patron to this show, please join us by going to bigbuckregistry.com/pledge. All the different categories of pledging are right there so you can see it. Also, you can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're on YouTube, youtube.com/bigbuckregistry, where you can not only see some of these live videos that we're starting to do, but you can listen to every single show in a YouTube video format. You can also follow us on iTunes, bigbuckregistry.com/iTunes. Please subscribe and review if you like this show. And you can also find us on Stitcher, Blueberry, and on Google+. I think that's pretty much it.
There's a whole lot of Big Buck, Jay.
Yes, sir. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
This is the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.